Good morning, 222. Last week we discussed commitment using Ruth and Boaz as models of that trait, remember? Today we're going to discuss Job, a true man of honor, a man above reproach even when faced with life's calamities. And I mean his life was tough. Honor is defined as character above reproach, living by a biblical standard. Living by a biblical standard, very important. Not your standard, not my standard, but God's standard. I say this a lot. Patrick Morley said about us that most of us want the God we want, not the God who is. And what we're looking for as a matter of honor is above reproach, living by God's standard, by a biblical standard. Now, Job is an interesting book because there's a lot about it that we don't know. We don't know when it was written. We don't know by whom it was written. In fact, some think that this is the earliest book of the Bible. Not written the earliest, but it deals with a man who died at 140 years old. So that would have been back in Abraham's time, right? And then in addition to that, you have a patriarchal society that's depicted here. Whatever the answers to those questions are, we know that God knew Job because he called him blameless. Can you imagine that? God calling you blameless? So we can learn from such a man. So get out your Bibles. Let's read Job 1, verses 1 through 20. Now there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. Now that's above reproach. Blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And that man, according to the Bible, was the greatest of all the men of the East. He was the greatest not only in terms of his wealth, but he was the greatest in terms of his moral and spiritual greatness. His sons used to hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of feasting had completed their cycle, Job would send and consecrate them, rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their heart." Thus Job did continually. Dads, what a challenge for each of us. Do we pray every single morning, "Lord, I pray for Stephen and Bo that if today that they have cursed you in their heart, if they have sinned, if they've done something, that you would excuse them, that you would forgive them?" Every day Job did that. He prayed daily, just in case, not even knowing that they'd sinned, just in case they'd sinned. Now, there was a day when the sons of the Lord came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming around on the earth and walking on it." Hey, by the way, Satan's still doing that according to 1 Peter 5:8. That says, "Be of sober spirit, but be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there's no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Basically what you see is happening here is that God is saying, I've got my man, and he is upright, and you can't mess him up, Satan. So keep in mind that as Job is going to go through these terrible trials, that he doesn't know about the agreement that Satan and God are going to make. He has no sense that things are going to be okay in the future because God is going to help him out in some way. He just simply has his faith to depend upon. God allows the trials. He doesn't initiate the trials, but he allows them. And he allows them with the expectation that you and I will succeed. When God allowed this trial for Job, the expectation was that Job would be successful. So Satan answered the Lord and he said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands. His possessions have increased in the land. And so Satan's challenge is, put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you face to face. Satan says, listen, if you take away all the stuff that he has, he will curse you. So Satan's challenge is that Job only obeys because God has prospered Job. And so if life gets hard, Job will abandon him. Well, let's see. Then the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him personally. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Now on the day when the sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, hey, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans attacked and took them. They slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped. And while he was still speaking, another came also, and he said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them and slew the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone am left, have escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, I mean, imagine, boy, it's just blow after blow after blow here. And while he was still speaking, another came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in your oldest brother's house, their older brother's house. And behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell on the young people and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. What did Job do? His children were dead. His fortune was gone. What did he do? Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshiped. What a remarkable reaction. He worshiped. Can you imagine that? All this terrible stuff has happened. And Job worshiped. We can learn so much from his reaction to calamity. You know, even his wife deserted him. She said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. And he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, listen, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job 2, 9 and 10. A modern day example of that is Arthur Ashe, who was a great tennis player, got infected with AIDS. And what happened was he had had a transfusion. And this was before we really knew much about AIDS. And so Ashe was at a news conference, and somebody said to him, Arthur, do you ever ask yourself, why me? And his response was incredible. He said, you know, when I won Wimbledon, I didn't ask God, and I didn't ask why me. And so no, now that I have AIDS, I don't ask why me. And that's exactly where Job was. In fact, Job made this stirring declaration about God. And he said this, though he slay me, I will hope in him. You see, that's where Job's hope was, and he knew it. Job 13 and 15. What character, what faith, what integrity. Decisions like Job made, by the way, are made in advance. If you don't want to have premarital sex or you don't want to have an affair, you need to have decided that in advance. Not in the heat of the moment, literally the heat of the moment, when you're in lust and you've got to make some decision. You don't want to do it then. You want to have set that stake in the ground long before that about the fact that you will not fall from your biblical position. And as the book goes on, Job makes some statements that reflect his biblical manhood. He says in Job 19, he says, as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he'll take his stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God. What great hope, right? He had great hope. His faith was strong. He said, even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and my advocate is on high. Job 16:19. He was looking forward to a heavenly reward, and every biblical man should. After all the pain Job went through, God referred to him as my servant Job. Wow. I heard a fellow just recently tell a story about the fact that he had become a Christian and he continued to mess up. He had temper issues, he had bitterness issues, he talked before he thought. He was really sad that he was giving such a poor witness for the Lord. One of his fraternity brothers said to him, yes, you are messing up, but when you do, you go to God, and I can tell that you are improving little by little. That conversation took place 19 years ago, and the fellow still remembers it because in many ways it reflects the walk of all Christians who are serious about their obedience to Christ. We mess up, we go to God, and He helps us mature little by little. By the way, that story is not about me. In a deep sense, I wish it were, but it's not. Oh, that I could be known as a man who is blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. A man of honor, a man above reproach. Wouldn't that be great? Well, the way that happens is I have to live life intentionally. I have to make those decisions before the pressure comes on me. I have to have decided in advance not to fail. And it has to be important to me. It's got to be so important to me. I had a friend of mine, actually a pastor one time, tell me, he said, I pray to God that if I were tempted by sexual sin, that before I fall into that sin, he said, I have prayed that God would kill me. I'm not saying that for effect. I'm saying that because it's true. That's a true story. And he was deadly serious about that. You know, you and I should be just as serious about sin and obeying God so that ultimately we can have victory through Christ. Be intentional this week. Honor Jesus. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.